The scorching Roman sun beat down mercilessly on the dusty hills, 20 miles outside the eternal city. Marcus Aurelius Maximus wiped the sweat from his scarred brow as he guided his horse along the narrow mountain path. His weathered hands, marked by countless battles in the arena, gripped the reins with practiced ease. At 28, Marcus carried himself with the quiet confidence of a man who had stared death in the face and emerged victorious time and again. "Master Marcus," called out the younger man, riding beside him, his voice carrying a mixture of concern and curiosity. "Those clouds on the horizon, they look like trouble." Marcus turned to look at his companion, a slight smile crossing his lips. Lucius was 19, with intelligent dark eyes that held wisdom far beyond his years. His lean frame bore the subtle scars of servitude, but his posture now spoke of freedom, a freedom Marcus had granted him just 2 years ago. "How many times must I tell you, Lucius?" Marcus's voice held gentle reproach. "You are no longer my slave, you are my brother, my friend. Call me Marcus, nothing more." Lucius ducked his head sheepishly, a habit he'd never quite shaken despite his newfound freedom. "Old habits, Marcus. Forgive me." The two men had been traveling since dawn, making their way to Marcus's childhood village of Tibur, nestled in the Sabine hills. It had been 15 years since Marcus had seen his birthplace, 15 years since Roman soldiers had dragged him away as a boy to be trained as a gladiator. Now, with his freedom earned through blood and sand, he felt compelled to return, to see what remained of his past. As they crested a particularly steep hill, the path ahead suddenly opened into a small valley dotted with ancient olive trees. The afternoon light cast long shadows across the landscape, creating an almost ethereal beauty that made both men pause in appreciation. "It's beautiful here," Lucius breathed, his eyes wide with wonder. Having spent most of his life in the cramped quarters beneath the Colosseum, the open countryside still amazed him. "Wait until you see Tibur," Marcus replied, his voice softening with memory. "My mother used to take me to pick olives in groves just like these. She would sing while we worked." His voice trailed off, lost in recollection. They continued down the winding path, their horses' hooves clicking rhythmically against the worn stones. The air was thick with the scent of wild herbs and the distant promise of rain. As they rounded a bend, Marcus suddenly pulled up short, his warrior's instincts immediately alert. "Do you see that?" he whispered, pointing ahead. There, partially hidden beneath a grove of cypress trees, sat an abandoned chariot. But this was no ordinary vehicle. Even from a distance, they could see the glint of gold and the rich purple fabric that marked it as belonging to someone of incredible wealth and status. Lucius felt a chill run down his spine despite the heat. "Marcus, that's an imperial chariot. Look at the golden eagles on the sides." Marcus dismounted slowly, his hand instinctively moving to the gladius at his side, a weapon he was permitted to carry as a freed gladiator. "Stay close," he murmured to Lucius. "Something isn't right here." They approached the chariot cautiously, their footsteps muffled by the carpet of fallen leaves. As they drew nearer, details became clearer. The vehicle was indeed magnificent, crafted from the finest woods and adorned with intricate carvings. Golden eagles with outstretched wings decorated the sides, and the purple silk canopy bore the unmistakable seal of the Roman Senate. "This belongs to someone very important," Lucius whispered, his voice barely audible. "A senator, maybe even a member of the imperial family," Marcus finished grimly. The chariot appeared undamaged, as if it had simply been abandoned rather than wrecked. The two horses that should have been pulling it were nowhere to be seen. Most disturbing of all was the complete silence that surrounded the vehicle. No sounds of struggle, no indication of what had happened to its occupants. Marcus circled the chariot slowly, his trained eyes scanning for any sign of danger. The leather reins hung loose, and there were no obvious signs of violence. But something about the scene felt profoundly wrong, like a beautiful painting with a subtle flaw that made the viewer uneasy. "Marcus, Lucius called softly from the other side of the chariot. "You need to see this." Marcus joined him quickly, and his blood ran cold. There, on the ground beside the chariot, was a small pool of dried blood. Not enough to suggest a fatal wound, but enough to indicate that someone had been seriously injured. "Look at this," Lucius said, pointing to the chariot's ornate door. It was slightly ajar, and from their angle they could see rich fabrics and what appeared to be personal belongings scattered inside. Marcus reached for the door handle, then hesitated. Every instinct he'd developed as a gladiator was screaming at him to walk away, to pretend they'd never seen this place. Involvement with imperial affairs rarely ended well for men like them, regardless of their legal state. But his curiosity, and perhaps his sense of justice, proved stronger than his caution. "If someone important is hurt," or he began. "Dead," Lucius finished quietly. Marcus nodded grimly. "Then we have a duty to report it. Despite everything Rome has done to us, we are still Roman citizens." With a deep breath, Marcus pulled open the chariot door. What they saw inside made both men freeze in absolute horror. The interior of the chariot was a scene of unimaginable tragedy. Rich silk cushions were soaked with blood, and scattered across the floor were items that told a story more horrifying than any gladiatorial combat Marcus had ever witnessed. There were children's toys, a small wooden horse, a rag doll with golden hair, tiny sandals that couldn't have fit anyone older than 5 or 6 years. All were stained with blood, but it was what lay in the corner that truly horrified them. A small bundle of cloth that had once been white but was now crimson with dried blood. Marcus reached for it with trembling hands, then stopped as he realized what he was looking at. It was a child's toga, torn and bloodied, with the distinctive purple stripe that marked it as belonging to the highest nobility. "Dear gods," Lucius whispered, his face pale as death. "Marcus, this is the clothing of a child of the imperial family," Marcus said, his voice hollow with shock and growing dread. As the full implications of their discovery began to sink in, both men realized they were no longer just witnesses to a crime. They had stumbled upon what appeared to be evidence of an attack on the imperial family itself. In Rome, such knowledge was often more dangerous than any wild beast in the arena. The storm clouds that had been gathering on the horizon suddenly seemed like an omen, and the first drops of rain began to fall, mixing with the dried blood on the chariot floor, and creating dark rivulets that seemed to weep for the innocence that had been lost in this beautiful, terrible place. Marcus closed the chariot door with shaking hands, his mind racing. They stood at a crossroads that would define the rest of their lives. If they lived long enough to have a rest of their lives. "What do we do now?" Lucius asked, his voice barely a whisper. Marcus looked at his young friend, this boy who had become like a brother to him, and felt the weight of responsibility settle on his shoulders like a mantle of lead. Whatever they decided in the next few moments would determine not just their fate, but possibly the fate of the entire Roman Empire. The rain began to fall harder, as if the heavens themselves were mourning the horror they had uncovered. The rain fell harder now, drumming against the chariot's golden canopy with an ominous rhythm that seemed to match the pounding of Marcus's heart. He and Lucius stood frozen beside the imperial vehicle, both men struggling to process the horrific implications of what they had discovered. "We need to look more carefully," Marcus said finally, his voice steady despite the turmoil in his mind. "If we're going to report this, we need to understand exactly what happened here." Lucius nodded, though his face remained pale. "But Marcus, if someone discovers us here, then we'll face whatever comes," Marcus replied grimly. "But we can't walk away from this, not when children were involved." With reluctant determination, Marcus opened the chariot door again. This time, he forced himself to examine the scene more methodically, his gladiator's training helping him compartmentalize the horror and focus on details that might reveal the truth. The interior was even more devastating upon closer inspection. In addition to the bloodied children's clothing, there were other items scattered about: a woman's jeweled bracelet, expensive scrolls that had been torn and stained, and what appeared to be official documents bearing imperial seals. "Lucius, help me with this," Marcus said, carefully lifting one of the torn scrolls. The parchment was of the finest quality, and despite the damage, portions of the text were still legible. Lucius, who had learned to read during his time as Marcus's companion, leaned in to examine the writing. His eyes widened as he made out the words. "Marcus, this is a letter from Emperor Vespasian himself. It's addressed to Senator Gaius Flavius Maximus." Marcus felt his blood turn to ice. Senator Maximus was one of the most powerful men in Rome, second only to the emperor himself. More importantly, he was known to travel with his young grandchildren, twin boys aged 6, who were beloved throughout the empire. "Keep reading," Marcus urged, his hands trembling slightly as he held the damaged parchment. "It speaks of a secret meeting," Lucius continued, his voice growing more strained with each word. "Something about evidence of treason. Marcus, I think Senator Maximus was carrying proof of a conspiracy against the emperor." The pieces of the horrific puzzle began falling into place. Marcus remembered hearing rumors in the Gladiator barracks, whispers of discontent among certain senators, talk of plots against Vespasian's rule. But he had dismissed them as the idle gossip of men with too much time and too little purpose. Now, standing in the rain beside this chariot of horrors, those rumors took on a terrifying new significance. "If Senator Maximus discovered evidence of treason," Marcus said slowly, working through the implications, "and if certain people knew he was traveling to present that evidence to the emperor, then they would have had reason to stop him." Lucius finished. "By any means necessary." Marcus continued his grim examination of the chariot's contents. Beneath one of the bloodied cushions, his fingers found something that made his heart sink even further. A child's wooden toy sword, no longer than his hand, carved with exquisite detail. It was the kind of toy that would belong to a young boy who dreamed of one day serving Rome with honor. "The twins," he whispered. "They were here." Lucius looked confused. "What twins?" "Senator Maximus's grandsons," Marcus explained, his voice heavy with growing dread. "Cassius and Quintus. They're 6 years old, and they travel everywhere with their grandfather. The whole city knows them. They're beautiful children, always laughing and playing in the forums." The rain continued to intensify, creating a curtain of water around them that seemed to isolate them from the rest of the world. In that moment, Marcus felt the weight of a terrible responsibility settling upon his shoulders. "But where are they now?" Lucius asked. "Where are their bodies? Where is the senator?" It was a question that chilled Marcus to his very core, because he was beginning to suspect he knew the answer. And it was worse than finding bodies would have been. "They're not dead," he said quietly. "At least, not yet." Lucius stared at him in confusion. "What do you mean?" Marcus pointed to the bloodstains in the chariot. "Look at the pattern. This isn't the blood of people who died here. This is the blood of people who were wounded, then taken somewhere else." "Taken where?" "I don't know. But whoever attacked them needed the senator and his grandsons alive, at least for a while. Maybe they needed information from the senator. Maybe they're using the children as leverage." As if summoned by their conversation, a new sound reached their ears through the rain, the distant thunder of hoofbeats approaching along the mountain path. Multiple horses, moving fast. Marcus and Lucius exchanged alarmed glances. There was no innocent explanation for armed riders to be approaching this remote location so soon after their grisly discovery. "Hide," Marcus hissed, grabbing Lucius by the arm and pulling him toward a cluster of large boulders near the edge of the grove. They barely made it to cover before 6 riders emerged from the rain-soaked path. Even at a distance, Marcus could see they were not ordinary travelers. They wore dark cloaks that concealed their identities, and their movements spoke of military training and deadly purpose. The leader of the group dismounted and approached the chariot with casual familiarity, as if he had been here before. He was a tall man with graying hair and the bearing of someone accustomed to command. When he spoke, his voice carried across the grove with chilling authority. "Any sign that someone's been here since we left?" he called to his companions. One of the other riders, a younger man with cruel eyes, walked around the chariot examining the ground. "Hard to tell with all this rain, Commander, but the door is closed exactly as we left it." "Commander," Marcus felt his stomach clench. These weren't common bandits. They were organized, military, and they had been here before. This had been a planned operation. "Good," the leader said. "The old fool should be ready to talk by now." 3 days without food or water, listening to his precious grandsons cry for help. Even the most stubborn senator has his breaking point. Marcus had to bite his tongue to keep from crying out in rage. The casual cruelty in the man's voice, the way he spoke of torturing an old man and innocent children, filled him with a fury that rivaled anything he had ever felt in the arena. "What about the children, Commander Brutus?" another rider asked. "They're becoming difficult to manage." The commander, Brutus, laughed coldly. "Children are remarkably resilient. They'll survive long enough to serve their purpose. Once we have the names of all the senator's co-conspirators and the location of the evidence he gathered against us, then we eliminate all 3 of them. Of course, they've seen too much, but we'll make it look like an accident, a tragic chariot crash in the mountains. The Empire will mourn the loss of the beloved senator and his grandsons, never knowing that they died as traitors." Marcus felt Lucius tense beside him, and he placed a restraining hand on the young man's arm. Every fiber of his being wanted to charge from their hiding place and challenge these monsters, but he forced himself to think strategically. 6 armed men against 2 would be suicide, and their deaths would only ensure that the senator and his grandsons died alone and unavenged. "How much longer will you keep them alive?" one of the riders asked. "The senator is old and weak. He'll break soon. Once he gives us what we need, we'll stage their deaths and return to Rome as heroes, the loyal soldiers who tried desperately to save the imperial family from treasonous conspirators." The commander remounted his horse, and the group began to move away from the chariot. But before they disappeared into the rain, Marcus heard words that chilled him to the bone. "Signal the others. Tell them we'll move to the final location tomorrow at dawn, the old ruins in the eastern valley. It's time to finish this." As the sound of hoofbeats faded into the storm, Marcus and Lucius remained hidden among the rocks, both men struggling to process what they had overheard. "Marcus," Lucius whispered urgently, "we have to do something. That senator and those children—" "I know," Marcus replied, his mind already racing with desperate plans. "But we're just 2 men against what sounds like a large conspiracy. If we make the wrong move, those children will die anyway," Lucius said fiercely, "and so will an innocent man." Marcus looked at his young friend, his brother in all but blood, and saw in Lucius's eyes the same fierce determination that had once driven him to win his freedom in the arena. It was the look of a man who had decided that some things were worth dying for. "The Eastern Valley," Marcus said quietly. "I know that place. There are ancient Roman ruins there, old temples and underground chambers. If they're planning to kill their prisoners tomorrow at dawn, then we have tonight to stop them," Lucius finished. As they prepared to leave their hiding place, Marcus felt the familiar sensation of standing at the edge of an arena, waiting for the gates to open and reveal whatever deadly challenge awaited him. But this time, the stakes were higher than his own life or freedom. This time, he was fighting for the lives of innocents and for the very soul of the empire he had served with his blood and sweat. The storm showed no signs of letting up as they mounted their horses and began the treacherous journey toward the Eastern Valley. Behind them, the abandoned chariot sat like a monument to human cruelty, its golden eagle seeming to weep tears of rain. Neither man spoke of their chances of success or of what would happen if they failed, but both understood that they had crossed a line from which there could be no return. The die was cast, and by dawn they would either be heroes or corpses. The journey through the rain-soaked mountains to the Eastern Valley was treacherous, made more dangerous by the need for absolute stealth. Marcus and Lucius guided their horses carefully along forgotten shepherd paths, avoiding the main roads where they might encounter more of the conspirators. As they rode, Marcus's mind worked furiously to piece together a plan. The ancient ruins in the eastern valley were familiar to him from his childhood. A complex of crumbling temples and underground chambers that had been abandoned for over a century. If the conspirators were holding their prisoners there, it would be both a perfect hiding place and a natural fortress. "Tell me about these ruins," Lucius said quietly, as they navigated a particularly steep section of the mountain path. "They're old, from the time of the Republic," Marcus replied, his voice barely audible over the rain. "The main temple sits on a hill overlooking the valley, but beneath it are a network of chambers and tunnels. My father used to tell stories about them, how they were built by priests who served the old gods, before Rome embraced the new ways. How many ways in and out? That's what worries me. Only one main entrance that I know of, and it's easily defended. If they have guards posted, then we'll have to find another way," Lucius said with grim determination. As they crested the final ridge before the valley, both men dismounted and approached the edge on foot. Through the rain and gathering darkness, they could see the silhouette of the ancient temple complex below, and there, flickering like fallen stars, were the unmistakable points of torchlight. "They're there," Marcus whispered. They spent several minutes studying the scene below. The main temple structure was partially collapsed, but the entrance to the underground chambers was clearly visible, marked by two stone pillars that had somehow survived the centuries. 3 men stood guard at the entrance, their positions suggesting military discipline. "I count at least 8 men," Lucius observed. "Probably more inside." Marcus nodded grimly. The odds were impossible, but that had never stopped him in the arena. "We need to get closer. I need to see the layout, find where they're keeping the prisoner." They left their horses tethered in a grove of pine trees and began the careful descent into the valley. The rain continued to work in their favor, masking their footsteps and reducing visibility. As they moved closer to the ruins, voices became audible over the storm. "Old man's finally starting to break," one guard was saying to another. "Been hearing him whimpering down there." "About time," the second guard replied. "Commander Brutus is getting impatient. He wants those names before dawn." Marcus and Lucius exchanged glances. If the senator was beginning to break under torture, they had even less time than they'd thought. They circled around to the far side of the temple complex, where Marcus remembered seeing smaller entrances during his childhood exploration. Sure enough, hidden behind a curtain of overgrown vines, they found a narrow opening that led into the underground chambers. "This connects to the main tunnels," Marcus whispered. "But it's going to be tight, and we'll be moving blind." "Better than trying to fight our way through 8 armed men," Lucius replied. They squeezed through the opening and found themselves in a narrow stone corridor that smelled of centuries of decay and abandonment. Using the dagger from his belt, Marcus carefully scraped away moss from the wall to reveal ancient carvings that would help him navigate the maze of passages. The sound of voices grew stronger as they moved deeper into the complex. Following the sound, they crept through connecting chambers until they reached a position where they could observe the main underground chamber. What they saw there filled them both with rage and despair. In the center of the chamber, illuminated by torches mounted on the walls, was Senator Gaius Flavius Maximus. The old man was chained to a stone pillar, his senatorial toga torn and bloodied. His noble face was bruised and swollen, but his eyes still held the dignity that had made him one of Rome's most respected leaders. But it was what they saw in the shadows behind him that truly broke their hearts. 2 small figures huddled together in a corner, also chained but to a shorter pillar that allowed them to sit on the stone floor. Even in the flickering torchlight, Marcus could see that these were the senator's grandsons, 6-year-old twins, who should have been playing in the gardens of their family villa instead of cowering in this tomb-like chamber. The boys were trying to be brave, but tears streaked their dirty faces, and the smaller of the 2 was quietly sobbing. Their fine clothes were torn and stained, and they looked as though they hadn't eaten in days. Standing over the senator was the man they had identified as Commander Brutus. His face was cruel in the torchlight as he leaned close to the old man's ear. "I'm growing tired of your stubbornness, Senator," he said coldly. "Perhaps it's time your grandsons experienced some of the same encouragement that you've been receiving." "No," the senator gasped, his voice hoarse but still defiant. "They're innocent children. They know nothing of political matters, but they mean everything to you," Brutus replied with a smile that chilled Marcus to the bone. "And their suffering might motivate you to remember where you hid the evidence of our treason." Brutus gestured to one of his men, who began walking toward the children with a drawn dagger. The twins pressed closer together, their eyes wide with terror. "Grandfather," the larger twin called out, his young voice echoing in the stone chamber. "Grandfather, help us." Marcus felt something break inside his chest at the sound of that terrified child's voice. He had seen death and suffering in the arena, had killed men with his own hands, but there was something about the innocence of those children that stripped away all his carefully constructed emotional defenses. Beside him, Lucius was trembling with rage. "We have to stop this," he whispered urgently. "Now, before they hurt those children." Marcus knew his friend was right, but his gladiator's tactical mind was still working. "If we charge in now, they'll kill all 3 prisoners before we can save them. We need a distraction." Looking around the ancient chamber, Marcus noticed something he had missed before. Old ceremonial braziers positioned around the room, designed to hold sacred fires during religious ceremonies. Many still contained ancient oil and dried materials that would burn readily. An idea began forming in his mind, desperate, but possibly their only chance. "Lucius, can you make your way back to that side passage we saw? The one that comes out near the main entrance?" "Yes, but why?" "I'm going to create a distraction. When you see flames, start shouting about Roman soldiers approaching. Make them think we're a larger force. In the confusion, I'll try to reach the prisoners." It was a desperate plan with almost no chance of success, but Lucius nodded without hesitation. "If this goes wrong, then we die as free men, fighting for something that matters," Marcus replied. "Better than growing old, wondering if we could have saved them." Lucius clasped his shoulder briefly, then disappeared back into the maze of passages. Marcus waited, counting heartbeats and listening to the senator's labored breathing and the quiet sobs of the children. After what felt like an eternity, he began moving to his first target, an ancient brazier positioned near the chamber's entrance. Using oil from a torch and some dry moss, he quickly prepared it to ignite. "Very well," he heard Brutus saying behind him. "Since the senator continues to be stubborn, perhaps hearing his grandson scream will loosen his tongue." The sound of a child's terrified whimper filled the chamber. Marcus had heard enough. He struck flint to tinder and ignited the first brazier, then moved quickly to light 2 more before anyone noticed the growing flames. As smoke began filling the chamber, he heard Lucius's voice echoing from the passages. "Roman soldiers, the temple is surrounded. Commander, we're under attack." The effect was immediate and chaotic. The conspirators began shouting orders, some rushing toward the entrance while others tried to determine the source of the supposed attack. In the confusion and growing smoke, Marcus drew his gladius and stepped into the chamber. "For Rome!" he roared, his battle cry echoing off the ancient stone walls as he charged toward the men threatening the children. The real battle for their lives had begun, and Marcus knew that the next few minutes would determine whether innocence would triumph over evil, or whether they would all die together in this forgotten tomb beneath the earth. The flames leaped higher, casting dancing shadows on the walls like the spirits of ancient gods, awakening to witness this clash between darkness and light. The underground chamber erupted into chaos as Marcus charged through the smoke and flame, his gladius gleaming in the torchlight. Years of arena combat had honed his reflexes to perfection, and he moved with the deadly grace of a man who had faced death 1,000 times and lived to tell the tale. The first conspirator, barely had time to turn before Marcus's blade found his heart. The man collapsed without a sound, his weapon clattering uselessly to the stone floor. "It's a gladiator," someone shouted through the smoke. "How did he?" Marcus didn't give them time to organize. He rolled behind one of the stone pillars as crossbow bolts whistled past his head, then emerged to strike down another enemy with a perfectly timed thrust. But even as he fought, he could see that the odds were overwhelming. There were too many of them, and they were beginning to recover from their initial shock. Commander Brutus had drawn his own sword and was advancing with the calculated movements of a seasoned military officer. "Kill the gladiator," he barked, "but keep the prisoners alive." From the passages beyond, Lucius continued his deception, shouting commands to imaginary soldiers and creating echoes that made their small force sound like a legion. But Marcus knew the ruse wouldn't work for long. As he parried a vicious sword thrust from one of Brutus's men, Marcus caught sight of the senator and his grandsons. The old man was straining against his chains, trying desperately to protect the children who huddled behind him. The twins' eyes were wide with terror, but they watched Marcus with something that might have been hope. That moment of distraction nearly cost him his life. A blade whispered past his ear, so close he felt the wind of its passage. Marcus spun and drove his elbow into his attacker's throat, sending the man crashing into the stone wall, but more were coming. Through the smoke he could see at least 4 more men advancing on his position, while Brutus himself circled to cut off any retreat. "Surrender now, gladiator," Brutus called out, his voice filled with cold authority. "You've fought bravely, but you're outnumbered. Yield, and I'll give you a quick death." Marcus laughed grimly, the sound echoing off the ancient walls. "I've heard that promise before in a dozen different arenas. It's always a lie." He feinted left, then dove right, rolling under a sword thrust and coming up inside his opponent's guard. His blade found the man's ribs with surgical precision, and another conspirator fell. But the effort left him exposed, and Brutus's sword sliced across his shoulder, drawing blood and sending fire through his arm. Marcus stumbled, his vision blurring momentarily from pain and the thickening smoke. "Marcus," the voice was Lucius, who had abandoned his diversionary tactics and burst into the chamber with a captured sword in his hands. The young man threw himself at one of the conspirators, who was advancing on Marcus's blind spot, saving his friend's life with desperate courage. But Lucius was not a trained fighter. Within moments, he was overwhelmed, taking a vicious cut across his chest that sent him to his knees. Blood flowed freely from the wound, staining his tunic crimson. "Lucius!" Marcus roared, his protective rage giving him new strength. He fought his way toward his fallen friend, cutting down 2 more men with the fury of a man who had nothing left to lose. But it was too late. Brutus had reached the children. "Enough," the commander shouted, pressing his dagger to the throat of the smaller twin. The boy's eyes were huge with terror, but he tried not to cry as the cold steel touched his skin. "Drop your weapons, or I'll open this child's throat right now." Marcus froze, his gladius halfway through a killing stroke. Across the chamber, Lucius struggled to his feet, blood still flowing from his wound. The smoke from the burning braziers was beginning to clear, revealing the full extent of their desperate situation. 5 of Brutus's men lay dead or dying on the stone floor, but 3 remained, plus the commander himself, against a healthy Marcus and Lucius. Those might have been acceptable odds. But Lucius was wounded, possibly dying, and Marcus could feel his own strength beginning to ebb from blood loss. Worst of all, Brutus now held the ultimate advantage, the life of an innocent child. "I said drop your weapons," Brutus repeated, pressing the dagger more firmly against the boy's throat. A thin line of blood appeared on the pale skin. "Grandfather," the child whimpered, looking toward Senator Maximus with heartbreaking trust. The old senator's face was a mask of anguish. "Please," he whispered to Brutus, "take me, kill me if you must, but let my grandsons go. They're just children." "Children who have seen too much," Brutus replied coldly, "but their deaths can still serve a purpose. Drop your sword, gladiator, or watch this boy die." Marcus felt the weight of impossible choice crushing down upon him. If he surrendered, they would all die anyway, slowly, painfully, after Brutus extracted whatever information he needed. But if he didn't surrender, an innocent child would die in front of his eyes. In that moment of frozen time, Marcus thought of all the choices that had led him to this chamber. The day the Roman soldiers had taken him from his village, the years of training and fighting in the arena, the moment he had won his freedom, the decision to free Lucius, the choice to investigate the abandoned chariot. Each decision had brought him closer to this moment, this test of everything he claimed to believe in. "You want names, don't you?" Marcus said suddenly, his voice carrying clearly through the chamber. "The senator's co-conspirators, the location of evidence that could bring down your little rebellion." Brutus's eyes narrowed with interest. "What do you know about it, Gladiator?" "More than you think," Marcus replied, slowly lowering his gladius, but not dropping it. "I've heard whispers in the barracks, rumors in the taverns. The arena is where all of Rome's secrets eventually end up." It was a desperate gambit, but Marcus could see it was working. Greed and ambition flickered in Brutus's eyes. The possibility that this gladiator might know something useful. Brutus commanded. Though he kept his dagger at the child's throat, Marcus began to speak, weaving a tale of half-truths and arena gossip, anything to buy time and keep Brutus's attention focused on him rather than on harming the children. As he spoke, he edged closer, his eyes never leaving the commander's face. Behind Brutus he could see Lucius slowly, painfully working his way to his feet. Blood still flowed from his wound, but his eyes were alert and determined. He was positioning himself for something. Marcus just hoped his young friend had enough strength left for whatever he was planning. "And that's when I realized the conspiracy reached all the way to the Praetorian Guard itself," Marcus continued, his voice growing stronger as he saw Lucius getting into position. "Impossible," Brutus breathed, his grip on the dagger loosening slightly as he leaned forward in fascination. "The guard is loyal to, now," Marcus shouted. Lucius threw himself forward, not at Brutus but at the stone pillar where the children were chained. His weight struck the ancient iron ring that held their chains, and centuries of rust and corrosion finally gave way. The twins' bonds snapped free, and they scrambled away from Brutus just as Marcus launched himself across the chamber. The commander spun to face this new threat, but Marcus was already inside his guard. Their blades met in a shower of sparks, and suddenly they were locked in single combat while chaos reigned around them. Brutus was skilled, perhaps the best swordsman Marcus had ever faced. But the gladiator had advantages the commander couldn't match: years of fighting for his life against impossible odds, reflexes honed by countless battles, and most importantly, the absolute certainty that he was fighting for something greater than himself. Their swords sang against each other as they circled through the smoke-filled chamber. Brutus fought with the precise technique of formal military training, but Marcus fought with the improvised creativity of a man who had learned that survival required constant adaptation. The decisive moment came when Brutus overextended himself in a killing thrust. Marcus sidestepped the attack and brought his gladius up in a perfect rising cut that took the commander in the chest. The blade penetrated deep, finding the heart with the precision of long experience. Brutus's eyes widened in shock and disbelief. He looked down at the sword protruding from his chest, then up at Marcus's grim face. "Impossible," he whispered. "You're just a slave. I was never just anything." Marcus replied quietly, "And I haven't been a slave for a very long time." Brutus collapsed, his sword clattering to the stone floor. Around the chamber, the last of his men had either fled or fallen. The immediate battle was over. But as Marcus rushed to check on Lucius and the prisoners, he realized that their greatest challenges still lay ahead. The underground chamber fell into an eerie silence, broken only by the crackling of the dying fires and the labored breathing of the survivors. Marcus knelt beside Lucius, his hands trembling as he examined his friend's wound. The cut across the young man's chest was deep, and blood continued to seep through Marcus's fingers as he tried to apply pressure. Lucius, stay with me, Marcus whispered urgently. You're going to be fine. Do you hear me? You're going to be fine. But even as he spoke the words, Marcus could see the pallor spreading across his friend's face, the way his breathing was becoming more shallow with each passing moment. The wound was worse than he had initially thought. The blade had gone deep, possibly nicking vital organs. Marcus, Lucius, his voice barely audible. The children, are they safe? Marcus looked over to where the twin boys huddled near their grandfather. Senator Maximus, despite his own injuries and exhaustion, had somehow managed to gather the children in his arms. The old man's eyes met Marcus's across the chamber, filled with gratitude and concern. They're safe, Marcus assured Lucius. You saved them. Your courage saved them all. A weak smile crossed Lucius's lips. Good. That's good. Don't talk, Marcus said firmly. Save your strength. We need to get you to a physician. But even as he spoke, Marcus knew they faced an almost impossible situation. They were miles from the nearest town, in the middle of a mountain storm, with no supplies and no means of properly treating Lucius's injuries. And there was still the matter of the conspiracy they had uncovered. How many more of Brutus's allies were out there waiting to finish what their commander had started? Marcus, Senator Maximus called softly. The old man was slowly making his way across the chamber, the twins clinging to his torn toga. Despite everything he had endured, the senator moved with the dignity that had made him one of Rome's most respected leaders. Senator, Marcus replied, carefully supporting Lucius as he helped him sit against one of the stone pillars. Are you hurt? Are the children? We are alive, thanks to you and your brave friend, the senator replied, his voice hoarse but firm. But I fear we are not yet out of danger. Commander Brutus spoke of others, allies in Rome who share his treasonous goals. Marcus nodded grimly. What were they after? What evidence did you carry? The senator's face darkened with anger and sorrow, proof of a conspiracy that reaches to the very heart of the empire. A group of senators and praetorian officers who planned to assassinate Emperor Vespasian and seize power for themselves. I discovered their plot quite by accident, while investigating irregularities in the grain distribution. He reached into a hidden pocket of his toga and withdrew a small scroll case, miraculously undamaged, despite their ordeal. Names, dates, financial records, everything needed to expose them. But they learned of my investigation and decided to silence me permanently. Using your grandsons as leverage, Marcus said, his voice filled with disgust. The cruelest part, the senator continued, his arm tightening protectively around the twins, is that they planned to frame us as the traitors. Our deaths would have been presented as the result of our own treasonous actions, while the real conspirators emerged as heroes who tried to save us. One of the twins, Marcus thought it was Cassius, the slightly larger of the two, looked up at his grandfather with eyes far too old for his 6 years. Grandfather, are the bad men all gone now? Yes, my brave boy, the senator replied gently. The gladiator and his friend made sure of that, but Marcus knew it wasn't that simple. Senator, how many others were involved in this conspiracy? How many know about this location? At least a dozen that I identified, possibly more. And Brutus mentioned others who were supposed to arrive at dawn to help stage our deaths. Marcus felt a chill that had nothing to do with the mountain air seeping through the ancient stones. Dawn was only a few hours away, and if more conspirators were coming, we need to leave, he said urgently. Now, before, Marcus. Lucius's voice was weaker now, and when Marcus looked down, he saw that his friend's face had grown even paler. I don't think I can travel. The truth of it hit Marcus like a physical blow. Lucius was dying. The wound was too severe, the blood loss too great. Even if they could somehow get him to a physician, the journey alone might kill him. Then we'll wait, Marcus said firmly. We'll find a way to. No. Lucius's voice carried surprising strength. You have to get them to safety. The senator, the children, they're more important than me. Don't say that, Marcus replied fiercely. You're my brother. I'm not leaving you behind." Lucius managed a weak laugh. Always the stubborn gladiator. But Marcus, think, if more conspirators are coming, and if the senator doesn't reach Rome with that evidence, the conspiracy succeeds, Marcus finished quietly. The emperor dies, and the empire falls into civil war. Exactly. And those children, they're the future of Rome. They deserve to grow up in a world where honor still means something. Marcus felt tears stinging his eyes, a rare occurrence for a man who had learned to suppress such emotions in the brutal world of the arena. But Lucius wasn't just his friend or his freed slave. He was the closest thing to family Marcus had left in the world. "There has to be another way," he insisted. From across the chamber came the sound of approaching voices, distant but growing close. The conspirators' reinforcements were arriving early. Senator Maximus heard them too. "Marcus, my friend, we must go. If they find us here—" "I know," Marcus replied, his voice breaking slightly. He looked down at Lucius, who was watching him with eyes that held perfect understanding. "It's all right," Lucius whispered. "I'm not afraid. I lived as a free man, fought beside the greatest gladiator in Rome, and helped save innocent children. That's more than I ever dreamed when I was just a slave in the Colosseum's dungeons." The voices were getting closer now, echoing through the stone passages. There was no more time for goodbyes. Marcus quickly gathered weapons and supplies from the fallen conspirators, then helped the senator and the twins prepare for their escape. The ancient drainage tunnel he had used to enter the complex would be their way out. It was narrow and treacherous, but it would lead them away from the approaching danger. "Lucius," he said, kneeling beside his friend one last time, "I swear to you by all the gods of Rome that your sacrifice will not be forgotten. I will make sure these children grow up knowing what you did for them." Lucius smiled, and for a moment he looked like the young man Marcus had first met in the gladiator barracks, full of hope and dreams of freedom. Tell them that sometimes a slave can be more free than an emperor. Tell them that courage isn't about being unafraid. It's about doing what's right even when you are afraid." Marcus clasped his friend's hand one last time, then turned to help the senator and children toward their escape route. As they reached the tunnel entrance, he looked back to see Lucius struggling to his feet, a sword in his hand, despite his wounds. "What are you doing?" Marcus called urgently. "Buying you time." Lucius replied simply, "Someone needs to slow them down. Make sure they don't follow you too quickly." The approaching voices were very close now. In moments the conspirators would enter the main chamber and discover the bodies of their comrades. "Lucius, go," his friend said firmly. "Honor my sacrifice by protecting what matters. Live free, Marcus. Live free for both of us." With tears streaming down his face, Marcus guided the senator and the twins into the narrow tunnel. Behind them, they heard the sound of approaching footsteps. Then Lucius's voice raised in a defiant battle cry that echoed through the ancient chambers like the roar of a lion. The sound of clashing steel followed them as they crawled through the darkness, and Marcus knew that his dearest friend was fighting his last battle, not for glory or gold, but for the simple right of innocent children to see another sunrise. By the time they emerged into the pre-dawn darkness, the sounds of combat had ceased. Lucius was gone, but his sacrifice had given them the precious minutes they needed to escape. Now Marcus faced the greatest challenge of his life, getting the senator and his grandson safely to Rome, while carrying the weight of evidence that could save or damn the empire, and the even heavier weight of losing the one person who had made his freedom truly meaningful. The rain had stopped, and the first pale light of dawn was beginning to show on the eastern Urzan. Somewhere in the distance, Marcus could hear the sound of horses as the surviving conspirators began their pursuit. The race for Rome, and for the future of the empire, had begun. The pale light of dawn revealed a landscape transformed by the night's storm. Marcus led the senator and his grandsons through treacherous mountain paths, slick with mud and scattered with fallen stones, their progress painfully slow, but necessarily careful. Behind them, the sound of pursuing horses grew steadily closer. Senator Maximus, despite his age and the ordeal he had endured, proved remarkably resilient. but the twins were struggling. Cassius, the older of the two, tried to keep up without complaint, but his smaller brother Quintus stumbled frequently, his 6-year-old legs simply not built for such a demanding journey. "I can't go much further, grandfather," Quintus whispered, tears mixing with the dirt on his face. "My feet hurt, and I'm so tired." Marcus felt his heart clench at the child's exhaustion. These boys should have been safe in their beds, not fleeing for their lives through hostile mountains. But he could also hear the horses getting closer. They had perhaps an hour's lead, maybe less. "Here," Marcus said, kneeling down. "Climb on my back, little one. I'll carry you." "But you're hurt too," Cassius observed, pointing to the blood that still seeped through Marcus's makeshift bandage. "I've fought in the arena with worse wounds," Marcus replied with a reassuring smile. "Besides, gladiators are trained to carry heavy shields and weapons. One small boy is nothing." As Quintus climbed onto his back, Marcus caught the senator's eye. The old man's face was etched with worry, not just for their immediate danger, but for the larger implications of their situation. "Marcus," the senator said quietly as they resumed their journey, "even if we reach Rome, I fear our troubles are far from over. The conspiracy Brutus spoke of runs deep. There are those who will not simply abandon their plans because we escape. Then we make sure the right people hear what you know," Marcus replied, adjusting his grip on Quintus while keeping his other hand free for his weapon. "Starting with Emperor Vespasian himself, if we can reach him. The conspirators will be expecting that. They'll have the roads watched, the palace guarded by their allies." It was a sobering thought. Marcus had been so focused on immediate escape that he hadn't fully considered the challenges of actually delivering the evidence to safety. Rome was a city of over 1 million people, rife with intrigue and corruption. How could they know who to trust? "Grandfather," Cassius said suddenly, tugging at the senator's toga. "I hear horses again." Marcus stopped, listening intently. The boy was right. The sound of hoofbeats was much closer now, echoing off the valley walls. Their pursuers had made better time than expected. "There," Marcus pointed to a cluster of large boulders ahead. "We can take cover and let them pass." They scrambled behind the rocks just as the first riders came into view. Marcus counted 6 men, all armed and moving with the systematic precision of a military search party. At their head rode a man Marcus didn't recognize, younger than Brutus, but carrying himself with similar authority. "Tribune Gaius," he heard one of the riders call. "The tracks lead this way, but the rain has made them difficult to follow. Then we search every cave, every hiding place." The tribune replied coldly, "The senator and those children cannot be allowed to reach Rome. The future of the empire depends on it." Marcus felt a chill at those words. These men genuinely believed they were saving Rome, which made them infinitely more dangerous than common criminals. Men fighting for an ideal, however twisted, would never give up. The search party moved past their hiding place, but Marcus knew they would be back when they lost the trail ahead. He waited until the sound of hoofbeats faded, then helped the senator and children emerge from cover. "We need to change direction," he said urgently. "They're expecting us to head directly for Rome. We need to be smarter." "Where can we go?" Senator Maximus asked. "Every road leads through territory they can control." Marcus thought for a moment, his mind racing through his knowledge of the region. Then inspiration struck. "The old Via Salaria," he said. "It's the ancient salt road, mostly abandoned now that the new highways exist. It's longer and more difficult, but it eventually connects to Rome through the eastern districts. Can we make it with the children?" Marcus looked at the twins, both exhausted, but trying to be brave. "We'll have to. It's our only chance of avoiding the main search parties." They changed course, heading east through increasingly wild terrain. The Via Salaria had once been a major trade route, but decades of neglect had left it barely passable. In some places, the ancient stones were completely overgrown. In others, landslides had blocked the path entirely. But it was precisely this difficulty that would work in their favor. The conspirators would never expect them to attempt such a route with 2 small children. As they walked, Senator Maximus began to tell Marcus more about the conspiracy he had uncovered. It began with the grain distributions, he explained, his voice low so the children wouldn't overhear the more frightening details. I noticed irregularities in the accounts, money disappearing, supplies being diverted. When I investigated, I discovered that several senators were embezzling funds meant to feed the poor. That seems like a relatively minor corruption, Marcus observed. That's what I thought initially, but when I dug deeper, I realized the stolen funds were being used to purchase weapons and bribe Praetorian guards. The grain theft was just the beginning. They were funding a military coup. How many are involved? At least 15 senators that I can prove, plus dozens of lesser officials and military officers. They call themselves the restorers of the Republic, believing that the imperial system has made Rome weak. Marcus shook his head in disgust. They would plunge the empire into civil war for their political theories. Worse than that, the senator continued grimly, their plan was to assassinate not just Vespasian, but his sons as well. They wanted to eliminate the entire Flavian dynasty and return to the old system of senatorial rule. As they reached a relatively level section of the old road, Marcus allowed the group to rest briefly. Quintus had fallen asleep on his back, and even Cassius was struggling to keep his eyes open. The senator, despite his years, seemed to draw strength from the urgency of their mission. Marcus, the old man said quietly, there's something else you should know. Something that makes this conspiracy even more dangerous. What is it? They have someone inside the palace, someone close to the emperor himself. I don't know who, but my investigation uncovered evidence of regular communications between the conspirators and someone with access to Vespasian's daily schedule, his private meetings, even his food tasters. The implications hit Marcus like a physical blow. If they have someone inside the palace, then simply reaching Rome won't be enough. We'll need to find a way to get the evidence to the emperor without going through any of the normal channels. As if summoned by their fears, the sound of hoofbeats echoed once again across the valley. But this time, the horses were approaching from ahead of them, not behind. They've circled around, Marcus realized with growing alarm. They're trying to trap us. Looking back, he could see dust clouds indicating more riders approaching from the direction they had come. The conspirators had split their forces and were closing in from both directions. Marcus, Senator Maximus said urgently, take the children and go. Leave me here. I'm old and wounded. I'll only slow you down. Absolutely not, Marcus replied firmly. We stay together. Be practical, man. If they capture me, they get the evidence anyway. But if you can get my grandsons to safety. Grandfather. No, Cassius had awakened and overheard the conversation. We won't leave you. The sound of horses was growing louder from both directions. Within minutes, they would be completely surrounded with no chance of escape. Marcus looked around desperately, his gladiator's tactical mind searching for any advantage. The old road passed through a narrow gorge here, with steep rocky walls on both sides. There was nowhere to run, nowhere to hide. But perhaps there was another option. Senator, he said suddenly, that evidence you carry, is it the only copy? Yes. Why? Because I have an idea. But it requires a tremendous leap of faith. The first riders were now visible at both ends of the gorge. Marcus estimated they had perhaps 2 minutes before being completely surrounded. Tell me, the senator said urgently. We give them what they want, Marcus replied. We surrender. Let them think they've won. Marcus, you can't be serious. Listen to me. They need you alive to tell them where the evidence is hidden, and they need the children alive to ensure your cooperation. That gives us time. And while they're focused on interrogating you, you'll escape and get word to Rome, the senator finished, understanding beginning to dawn in his eyes. Exactly. But only if you're willing to trust me with the evidence. Without hesitation, Senator Maximus handed over the scroll case. I would trust you with more than evidence, my friend. I would trust you with the future of Rome itself. As the riders closed in from both directions, Marcus quickly concealed the scroll case in his tunic, then helped the exhausted children to their feet. Cassius, Quintus, he said seriously, looking directly into their young eyes. Do you remember what I told you about being brave? Both boys nodded solemnly. I need you to be braver than you've ever been before. Can you do that for me? Yes, sir, Cassius replied, his voice steady despite his fear. The riders had surrounded them now, weapons drawn and faces grim with purpose. At their head rode the tribune Marcus had seen earlier, his expression cold and determined, Senator Gaius Flavius Maximus. The tribune called out formally, "By the authority of the Senate and people of Rome, you are under arrest for treason against the empire." It was a lie, of course, but spoken with such conviction that Marcus almost admired the man's audacity. Tribune Senator Maximus replied with dignity, "I believe you are gravely mistaken about who the real traitors are." "We shall see," the tribune replied. "Search them, find the evidence." As the soldiers began their search, Marcus caught the senator's eye one last time. The old man gave an almost imperceptible nod. He understood what was at stake, and he was ready to play his part in Marcus's desperate gambit. Everything now depended on whether a gladiator's instinct for survival could overcome the most sophisticated conspiracy in the history of the Roman Empire. The fate of an empire hung in the balance, carried in a small scroll case hidden beneath the tunic of a freed slave who had once fought wild beasts for the entertainment of crowds. The soldiers searched them thoroughly but found nothing. Marcus had hidden the scroll case in a place no Roman would think to look, sewn into the lining of his leather gladiator's belt, a technique he had learned from smugglers in the Subura district. The tribune's frustration was evident, as his men came up empty-handed. "Where is it, Senator?" the tribune demanded, his voice sharp with anger. "We know you carry evidence of your treasonous activities." Senator Maximus drew himself up with the dignity that had made him one of Rome's most respected leaders. "I carry evidence, Tribune, but not of my own treason. The documents you seek would expose the real conspirators, including, I suspect, yourself." The tribune's hand moved to his sword hilt, but he controlled himself. "Bind them," he ordered his men. "We return to the fortress. Commander Gaius will know how to loosen the old man's tongue." As rough hands bound their wrists, Marcus caught sight of Cassius and Quintus, trying desperately not to cry. The boys had been through so much, had shown such courage, and now they faced even greater dangers. "It will be all right," he whispered to them as they were loaded onto horses. "Remember what I told you about being brave." The journey to the conspirators' fortress took most of the remaining day. Marcus used the time to memorize every detail of their route, every landmark that might help him find his way back to Rome when the time came to escape. The fortress itself was an old Republican-era stronghold, probably abandoned by the legions decades ago, but now obviously serving as the conspiracy's headquarters. As they were dragged through the gates, Marcus was struck by the scale of the operation. There were at least 50 men within the walls, all wearing the equipment and bearing the discipline of professional soldiers. This wasn't a ragtag group of discontented senators. This was a military force capable of seizing control of Rome itself. They were thrown into a stone cell beneath the fortress's main tower. The chamber was small and damp, with only a narrow window high in the wall to provide light. The senator and his grandsons huddled together in one corner, while Marcus positioned himself near the door where he could listen for approaching guards. "Grandfather," Quintus whispered, his small voice echoing in the confined space. "I'm scared." "I know, my brave boy," the senator replied softly, pulling both children close. "But look at us. We're still together, and we're still alive. As long as we have that, there's hope." "What about Lucius?" Cassius asked suddenly, looking at Marcus with eyes that seemed far too old for his 6 years. "Is he really dead?" Marcus felt the familiar stab of grief at his friend's name. "Yes," he said quietly, "but he died as a hero, protecting people he cared about. That's the kind of death any warrior would be proud of." "Will we die too?" Quintus asked with the heartbreaking directness of childhood. Marcus moved closer to the children, kneeling so he could look directly into their faces. "I'm going to tell you something important, and I need you both to listen carefully. Sometimes when people are in great danger, they have to make difficult choices. They might have to pretend to give up, or pretend to be defeated in order to win in the end. Like a trick? Cassius asked. Exactly like a trick. And sometimes brave people have to be separated for a little while so they can help each other better. The senator caught Marcus's meaning immediately. Children, he said gently, Marcus is going to have to leave us soon. But it's not because he's abandoning us. It's because he's going to save us. Before either child could respond, footsteps echoed in the corridor outside their cell. The heavy wooden door swung open, and the tribune entered with 2 guards. Senator, he said without preamble, Commander Gaius wishes to speak with you, privately, and if I refuse, the tribune's gaze moved to the children. Then your grandsons will begin to experience the same encouragement that proved so effective with your friend Lucius. Marcus felt rage boil up in his chest, but he forced himself to remain still. This was part of the plan. They needed to be separated so he could attempt an escape. I'll come, the senator said quietly, rising to his feet with dignity and tact, despite the chains around his wrists. As they led the old man away, Cassius grabbed Marcus's arm. You're going to leave us, aren't you? Marcus knelt beside the boy again. Only for a little while, and only so I can bring help. Do you understand? Both children nodded, though their eyes were bright with unshed tears. Listen to me carefully, Marcus continued. No matter what happens, no matter what anyone tells you, remember that your grandfather is a hero. He's trying to save Rome itself. And remember that brave people like you can endure anything, because you know that good always defeats evil in the end. The afternoon passed slowly. Marcus could hear voices from other parts of the fortress. Shouted orders, the sound of weapons being sharpened, horses being prepared. The conspiracy was moving into its final phase, probably planning to march on Rome within days. As evening approached, guards brought them meager rations of bread and water. The children ate reluctantly, their worry for their grandfather overwhelming their hunger. Tell us about the arena, Cassius said suddenly. Tell us about being a gladiator. Marcus understood what the boy was doing, trying to distract himself and his brother from their fears. So he began to tell them stories, carefully edited versions of his battles that emphasized courage and honor rather than violence and death. The most important thing in the arena, he explained, wasn't being the strongest or the fastest. It was knowing when to be patient, when to wait for exactly the right moment to act. Like now? Quintus asked. Exactly, like now. As full darkness fell, Marcus put his escape plan into motion. The window in their cell was too small and too high for a man to climb through, but it was perfect for something else. Using threads pulled from his tunic, he fashioned a crude but effective sling. What are you doing? Cassius whispered. Creating a distraction, Marcus replied, selecting a small stone from the cell floor. He aimed carefully through the window and launched the stone toward a section of the fortress wall where he had seen guards posted. The stone struck metal with a clear ringing sound, probably a helmet or shield. Immediately, shouts arose from that section of the wall. Guards rushed to investigate the noise, thinking perhaps they were under attack. In the confusion, Marcus heard what he had been waiting for, the sound of running footsteps in the corridor outside their cell, as guards left their posts to investigate the disturbance. Now, he whispered to the children, this is when I leave. But remember, I will come back for you. I promise. Using a technique learned in his gladiator training, Marcus dislocated his own thumb, allowing him to slip free of his bonds. The pain was excruciating, but he had endured worse in the arena. The cell door was locked, but the lock was old and crude. Using a piece of metal broken from his belt, Marcus worked at the mechanism until he heard the satisfying click of tumblers falling into place. Be brave, he whispered to the twins one last time. Be brave and wait for me. Then he was gone, slipping through the door and into the darkened corridor like a shadow given form. The fortress was in chaos. Guards ran back and forth, trying to determine the source of the mysterious attack. In the confusion, no one noticed one more figure moving through the shadows. Marcus made his way toward the main gate, staying in the darkness and moving with the careful patience he had learned during countless arena battles. But as he reached the courtyard, he realized escape wouldn't be as simple as he had hoped. The gate was heavily guarded, and the walls were too high to climb without equipment. He was trapped inside the fortress just as surely as if he was still in the cell. But then he remembered something. Fortresses like this always had sally ports, small hidden gates designed to allow defenders to launch surprise attacks on besieging forces. If he could find, he began a careful circuit of the inner wall, feeling along the stones for any sign of a concealed opening. Time was running out. Eventually, someone would check on the prisoners and discover his escape. Finally, his fingers found what he was looking for. A section of wall where the mortar felt different, where the stones were slightly loose. Working carefully in the darkness, he managed to move one of the stones aside, revealing a narrow passage that led through the wall. As he squeezed through the opening, Marcus could hear shouts from the direction of the cells. Escape had been discovered. But he was outside the walls now, free to begin the most important race of his life. A desperate journey to Rome, to expose the conspiracy and save the senator and his grandsons. Behind him, torches flared to life along the fortress walls as the search began. Ahead lay 40 miles of hostile territory, patrolled by the conspiracy's allies and filled with dangers both human and natural. But Marcus had something his enemies didn't expect. The scroll case hidden in his belt, containing evidence that could bring down their entire plot. And he had something even more valuable. The memory of Lucius's sacrifice, and a promise made to two brave children that he would return for them. As he disappeared into the darkness, Marcus began to run with the steady, ground-eating pace of a man who had trained his entire life for moments like this. The fate of Rome ran with him through the night. Marcus ran through the night like a man possessed, his gladiator's conditioning serving him well as he covered mile after mile of treacherous mountain terrain. The scroll case pressed against his ribs with each step, a constant reminder of the precious evidence he carried and the lives that depended on his success. By dawn, he had reached the outskirts of Rome itself. The eternal city sprawled before him in all its magnificent corruption. Marble temples gleaming in the morning light alongside crowded tenements, the smoke of 1,000 cooking fires mixing with incense from countless altars. Somewhere in that vast metropolis was Emperor Vespasian, and somewhere else were the conspirators who planned to kill him. But Marcus faced an almost impossible challenge. How could a freed gladiator, bloodied and exhausted from his escape, gain an audience with the most powerful man in the world? The normal channels, the Praetorian Guard, the palace officials, even the senators, could not be trusted. Any of them might be part of the conspiracy. As he approached the city gates, inspiration struck. There was one person in Rome who might help him, someone whose loyalty to the empire was beyond question, and whose influence could open doors that would remain forever closed to men like Marcus. Gaius Flavius Sabinus, the urban prefect and brother of Emperor Vespasian himself. Marcus had once fought in games celebrating Sabinus's birthday, and he remembered the man as honest and forthright, qualities that had made him somewhat unpopular among the more corrupt elements of Roman society. If anyone could be trusted with evidence of treason, it would be the emperor's own brother. But reaching Sabinus would require getting into the heart of Rome without being recognized by the conspiracy's agents. Marcus needed a disguise, and he needed help. As he pondered his options, Marcus noticed a familiar figure among the crowds entering the city, an old gladiator named Titus, who had fought in the same stable as Marcus years ago. Titus had won his freedom around the same time as Marcus, but had chosen to remain in Rome, working as a trainer for new fighters. Titus, Marcus called out, careful to keep his voice low. The older man turned, his scarred face breaking into a grin of recognition. Marcus, by Jupiter's beard, what brings you back to this cesspit of a city? I need your help, old friend, more than you know. Something in Marcus's tone must have conveyed the urgency of the situation, because Titus's expression immediately grew serious. What kind of help? The kind that could get you killed if you're discovered helping me. Titus laughed grimly. Friend, I've been dying slowly in this city for years. At least your kind of trouble sounds interesting. What do you need? Within an hour, Marcus was cleaned, dressed in a simple citizen's toga, and armed with directions to Sabinus's private residence. Titus had even provided him with a letter of introduction, claiming that Marcus was a veteran gladiator seeking employment as a bodyguard. The urban prefect lives simply, Titus explained as they walked through the city streets. No grand palace, just a comfortable villa in the Aventine district. He's known for seeing petitioners personally, especially veterans. Titus, Marcus said quietly, if this goes wrong, then I'll claim you forced me to help you at sword point, his friend replied with a wink. Don't worry about me, Marcus. Just do whatever it is you came here to do. The villa of Gaius Flavius Sabinus was indeed modest by the standards of Roman nobility. A well-appointed but unpretentious house, surrounded by gardens that spoke of a man who valued substance over show. Marcus approached the main gate nervously, acutely aware that his entire plan depended on convincing a man he had never met to trust him with information that could topple the government. The guards at the gate were professional, but not hostile. When Marcus presented Titus's letter and requested an audience, they directed him to wait in a small antechamber while they consulted with their master. After what felt like hours but was probably only minutes, a slave appeared and led Marcus through the villa to a simple study lined with scrolls and military memorabilia. Behind a plain wooden desk sat a man in his late 50s, wearing the simple white toga of a Roman citizen rather than the elaborate dress of high office. Gaius Flavius Sabinus looked remarkably like his more famous brother, with the same strong jaw and intelligent eyes that had made the Flavian family one of the most respected in Rome. But where Vespasian carried himself with the absolute authority of imperial power, Sabinus had the more relaxed bearing of a man comfortable with his place in the world. "You're the gladiator my guards mentioned," Sabinus said without preamble. "Titus speaks highly of your skill and character. What can I do for you?" Marcus took a deep breath, knowing that his next words would either save or damn him. "My lord, I come bearing evidence of a conspiracy against the emperor's life." Sabinus's expression didn't change, but Marcus caught the slight stiffening of his posture that indicated he was taking the claim seriously. "Continue. 3 days ago, I discovered an abandoned imperial chariot in the mountains outside Rome. Inside was evidence that Senator Gaius Flavius Maximus and his grandsons had been kidnapped by conspirators planning to overthrow your brother. Senator Maximus is missing?" Sabinus leaned forward, his casual demeanor replaced by sharp concern. "This is the first I've heard of it, because the conspirators planned to make his disappearance look like an accident," Marcus explained. "But before they killed him, they tortured him for evidence he had gathered about their plot." Marcus carefully withdrew the scroll case from his belt and placed it on the desk. "This contains the proof, my lord. Names, dates, financial records, everything needed to expose a conspiracy that reaches into the Senate and the Praetorian Guard itself." Sabinus examined the scroll case, his eyes widening as he recognized the senator's personal seal. With careful hands he opened the case and began reading the documents within. As he read, his face grew pale, then flushed with anger. "Dear gods," he whispered, "this goes deeper than I ever imagined. Marcus, that is your name, isn't it? How did you come by these documents?" Marcus told his story in quick, efficient sentences. The discovery of the chariot, the rescue attempt, Lucius's sacrifice, his own escape from the fortress. He left out nothing, knowing that Sabinus would need the complete truth to understand the urgency of the situation. "The senator and his grandsons are still alive," Marcus concluded, "but only until the conspirators realize I've escaped with this evidence. Once they know the truth is out, they'll have no reason to keep them alive." Sabinus was already moving, calling for his personal guards and dictating rapid orders. "Send word to my brother immediately, but use only the most trusted messengers. Tell him to trust no one in the Praetorian Guard, until we can determine who is compromised and mobilize the urban cohorts. We're going to need loyal troops. My lord, Marcus said urgently, there's something else. The senator said they have someone inside the palace itself, someone with access to the emperor's daily schedule. This news stopped Sabinus cold. Someone inside the palace? But that means that they could strike at any time, Marcus finished. And they'll know we're moving against them almost as soon as we begin. For a moment the weight of the situation seemed to overwhelm even the urban prefect, but then his shoulders straightened with the same determination that had made his family the rulers of the known world. Then we move fast and we move decisively, he said. Marcus, I'm going to ask you to do something that goes far beyond what any citizen should be required to do. Name it, my lord. Come with me to the palace. Help me identify the conspirators from these documents. Your knowledge of their fortress, their numbers, their plans, it could be the difference between saving the empire and watching it fall into civil war. Marcus thought of Cassius and Quintus, probably huddled in that cold cell, wondering if he would keep his promise to return for them. He thought of Lucius, who had died believing that their sacrifice would matter. I'll come, he said simply. The journey to the palace was a blur of urgent activity. Sabinus had mobilized his most trusted men, and they moved through Rome like a small army, prepared for anything. As they approached the imperial complex, Marcus could see increased activity, more guards than usual, unusual movement among the Praetorian units. They know, Sabinus said grimly. Someone has warned them that we're coming, but they pressed forward anyway, because there was no choice. In the palace courtyard, they were met by a familiar figure, Tribune Gaius, the same man who had captured them at the gorge. But now he wore the uniform of a Praetorian officer, and his presence here could only mean one thing. My lord Sabinus, the tribune said with false courtesy, how unexpected to see you here with interesting companions. Around the courtyard, Marcus could see other Praetorian guards moving into position. They were walking into a trap, but it was too late to retreat. Tribune Sabinus replied calmly, I need to see the emperor immediately. There are matters of state that require his urgent attention. I'm afraid that's impossible, my lord. The emperor is indisposed. The words hit Marcus like a physical blow. If Vespasian was already dead, but Sabinus refused to give up, then I demand to see him immediately, or I'll have you arrested for insubordination. The tribune smiled coldly. My lord, I think you'll find that your authority is somewhat limited. Under the current circumstances, it was then that Marcus heard it, a sound that made his heart leap with desperate hope. From somewhere within the palace came the unmistakable sound of children's voices, raised in fear and confusion. Cassius and Quintus were here. The conspirators had moved them to the palace as part of their final gambit, and where the children were, Senator Maximus would be as well. My lord, Marcus whispered urgently to Sabinus, whatever happens, the emperor must see that evidence. Even if we die here, the truth must survive. Sabinus nodded grimly, his hand moving to the scroll case. Around them the Praetorian guards were closing in, their weapons drawn and their intentions clear. The moment of truth had arrived. In the next few minutes, the fate of the Roman Empire would be decided, not by armies on distant battlefields, but by a handful of men standing in a marble courtyard, fighting for the soul of the civilization that ruled the world. Marcus drew his gladius, feeling the familiar weight of the weapon in his hand. One last battle, for the highest stakes imaginable, for Rome, for justice, for two brave children who deserved to grow up in a world where honor still mattered. The steel sang as it cleared the scabbard, and Marcus stepped forward to face whatever destiny awaited him in the heart of the greatest empire the world had ever known. But even as the final confrontation began, he could hear somewhere in the distance the sound of approaching footsteps, heavy, measured, and moving with the unmistakable authority of imperial power. Emperor Vespasian himself was coming. The conspiracy had failed to kill him after all. And in that moment Marcus knew that Lucius's sacrifice and all their struggles had not been in vain. The truth would survive, and Rome would endure. The last chapter of their desperate gambit was about to be written, and for the first time since this all began, Marcus dared to hope that it might have a happy ending.